Imagine a history so dark, even the whispers of its truth make people uncomfortable. Sexual abuse is a trauma that haunts both women and men, though often in different ways. For women, the weight of shame, fear, and societal judgment can silence their voices, trapping them in a cycle of guilt and self-blame. For men, the stigma of vulnerability and expectations of masculinity can make it even harder to acknowledge their pain, leaving them to grapple with isolation and a sense of brokenness. In both cases, the scars are invisible, and the path to healing is a battle no one should have to fight alone. Today, we're uncovering a shocking and overlooked chapter of slavery, the untold abuse of black male slaves by white women, a story history books rarely tell. This video isn't about blaming or sensationalizing. It's about exposing a hidden reality, how power, control, and exploitation during slavery extended far beyond what most of us were taught. Black men, already dehumanized under slavery, were also victims of abuse, including sexual violence, by white women. Stick around, because the truth is both heartbreaking and critical to understanding the full scope of this history. Let's set the stage. The 18th and 19th centuries saw slavery institutionalized as a brutal system of dehumanization. Black male slaves, like all enslaved individuals, were stripped of autonomy and humanity. However, while much of the narrative focuses on white male slave owners, the role of white women in this system is often ignored. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. White women, although publicly seen as delicate and morally upright, sometimes use their positions of power to exploit black male slaves. This wasn't about relationships or mutual consent. It was about domination and control, wielding the same authority as their husbands or fathers. It's vital to understand that the plantation system was a highly structured, hierarchical environment where even the so-called secondary figures, like white women, held significant influence. They could determine the lives of those beneath them in every sense, from assigning labor to exacting punishment, and this included exercising their power in abusive ways. Historical accounts reveal a disturbing reality. Enslaved black men were not only laborers but also frequent victims of sexual exploitation. White women could abuse these men without fear of legal or social consequences because enslaved individuals had no rights or protections. Think about the sheer imbalance of power. A single accusation against a black man could lead to violent punishment or lynching, while any resistance to abuse could result in equally severe consequences. This chilling reality highlights how systemic oppression and unchecked power created conditions where abuse thrived. Sexual violence during slavery wasn't simply about physical exploitation. It was a way to assert dominance and reinforce the racial hierarchy. Enslaved black men were reduced to objects, and their abuse was another method to solidify the superiority of white enslavers. Stories of this kind of abuse often disappeared into silence, partly due to the unwillingness of society to confront the uncomfortable intersections of race, gender, and power. Let's delve deeper. Harriet Jacobs's autobiography, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, sheds light on the abusive dynamics present on plantations. While Jacobs primarily focused on her own harrowing experiences, she described an environment where exploitation, of all kinds, was normalized. Yet these narratives often go untold because they challenge the prevailing image of white women as passive victims of patriarchy. Acknowledging this darker truth disrupts simplistic historical portrayals, but it's necessary for a fuller understanding. The absence of these stories in mainstream historical accounts reflects how history has been curated to serve certain narratives while erasing others. Black male slaves, already marginalized, were further silenced in the historical record when it came to their suffering at the hands of white women. As a result, the broader public remains unaware of this grim aspect of slavery. Now, let's consider the role of the law in perpetuating these abuses. The 1662 Virginia statute, for example, dictated that a child's status as free or enslaved followed the mother's condition. This legal framework ensured that even if a white woman bore a child with a black male slave, the child would remain enslaved, cementing her dominance and absolving her of accountability. Such laws didn't just reinforce the institution of slavery, they also created a system where white women were protected from legal repercussions, further entrenching the power imbalance. By enshrining these dynamics in law, society effectively erased the humanity of black male slaves and removed any semblance of justice. The legal system not only upheld slavery but also perpetuated the cycle of abuse by giving white women the freedom to act without consequence. The psychological impact on black male slaves was profound. Imagine living under the constant threat of violence and dehumanization, compounded by exploitation that stripped away your dignity. This wasn't just about survival. It was about enduring trauma that left lasting scars. Victims of abuse were left with no outlet to process their pain. They couldn't speak out, seek justice, or even acknowledge their suffering without risking further punishment or death. The trauma didn't end with slavery's abolition. It was carried forward through generations, shaping family dynamics, mental health, and community resilience in the face of systemic oppression. Understanding this trauma is critical because it forces us to confront not just what was done, but how those wounds have lingered in ways that are still felt today. The psychological scars of slavery are interwoven with the fabric of modern society. So, why hasn't this story been told more widely? One reason is how history is recorded. The voices of enslaved individuals, especially black men, were often erased or dismissed. Survivors of abuse had no platform, and even when they spoke out, their accounts were ignored or deemed unreliable. Another reason lies in the portrayal of white women. Historically, they've been seen as symbols of virtue and innocence, making it difficult to reconcile their active roles in oppression. But history isn't about comfort, it's about truth. To confront these stories is to challenge deeply ingrained societal myths, but doing so is essential for a fuller understanding of history and its ongoing impact. Silencing these voices perpetuates ignorance and allows harmful patterns to continue. This abuse wasn't isolated. It was part of a larger system of white supremacy that permeated every aspect of life. Consider the enduring stereotypes of black men as hypersexual or dangerous. These tropes originated in systems of slavery and persist in modern society. Failing to confront these truths allows such harmful narratives to persist. By bringing these stories to light, we not only honor the victims but also challenge the structures that sustain inequality. Recognizing the intersectionality of these abuses, where race, gender, and power collide, reveals how systemic oppression functions on multiple levels. This acknowledgement is necessary for dismantling it. What can we learn from this history? First, it underscores the danger of unchecked power. Whether in slavery or modern systems, when one group holds disproportionate authority over another, exploitation becomes almost inevitable. Second, it highlights the complexity of oppression. Recognizing white women's active participation in slavery doesn't negate the ways they were also oppressed. It simply paints a more accurate picture of history. Understanding this complexity helps us see how privilege and victimhood can coexist. Finally, it reminds us that history isn't static. It's an evolving narrative that must be revisited and revised as new perspectives come to light. Only by doing so can we approach a more truthful account of the past. The legacy of this abuse extends far beyond the past. It shaped societal perceptions of black men, fueling stereotypes that influence media, culture, and the justice system today. Consider how black men are often portrayed as threats or reduced to harmful caricatures. These narratives have deep historical roots. By understanding this history, we take a crucial step toward dismantling these stereotypes and addressing the systemic racism they perpetuate. It's a reminder that the past is never just the past, it's a lens through which we view and shape the present. So, how do we ensure these stories aren't forgotten? Education is key. Schools, universities, and media platforms must include these perspectives to challenge outdated narratives. It's equally important to listen to and amplify the voices of Black historians, writers, and activists who've long been telling these stories. They've done the work. Now it's up to us to learn from them and share what we've discovered. Amplifying these stories isn't just about remembering. It's about reclaiming a history that was stolen and reshaping how we think about justice, power, and humanity. Finally, this isn't just about history. It's about justice. The legacy of slavery's abuses is still with us, from systemic racism to the stereotypes that harm Black men today. Acknowledging these truths is essential for building a more equitable society. Justice also means remembering. The stories of these men deserve to be told, not hidden away because they make us uncomfortable. Honoring their resilience and humanity is a step toward healing. As we reflect on this history, let's also consider what we can do moving forward. Conversations about power, privilege, and systemic inequality are often difficult, but they're necessary. We need to challenge ourselves and others to confront uncomfortable truths and push for change in policies, education, and representation. Let me leave you with this. Who benefits from the silences in history, and who suffers from them? These are not just questions for the past, but questions that echo into our present, shaping the world we live in today. When we silence voices, we not only erase the stories of those who lived them, but we also distort the very truths we claim to hold dear. History, in its incomplete form, often carries the weight of power, privilege, and oppression. But what if we choose to challenge that? What if we dare to listen to the voices that have been erased, forgotten, or ignored? What if we make space for those stories to be heard, to be seen, to be felt? In this moment, the story of history is not a closed chapter. It's a living, breathing narrative, still unfolding before us. And we, each one of us, have the power to shape it. We are the ones who can amplify the voices that have been silenced for far too long. We are the ones who can confront the comfortable lies, the selective memories, the histories written by the powerful few. We are the ones who can write a different history, a history that includes the marginalized, the oppressed, the unheard. But it's not easy. It's uncomfortable. It requires us to look at the injustices of the past and recognize them in the present. It demands that we confront the systems that benefit from keeping these silences intact. And it calls us to act. Because history isn't over. It's still being written. And we, right now, have the chance to choose how that story will unfold. So, let's continue asking the hard questions. Let's continue to demand accountability. Let's continue to fight for the spaces and the platforms for those who have been silenced. The history we write today will be the inheritance we leave for the future. Let's make sure it's one of justice, of truth, and of voices that can no longer be ignored. Please like and subscribe so we can build a community that can be a voice for our people and ensure we are always heard.